Morning everyone. Right, before we start today's lesson, here is a quick quiz. There's 6 questions there based on previous topics or previous lessons. I'm going to get you to just pause the video here whilst you write down those 6 questions and then write down your answers, and when you press play we'll go through them together. Okay, so let's go through these questions. So question 1 said put these in order of size, and we want the biggest first. So from that list we've got an atom, an animal cell, a cell nucleus, so muscle tissue, a protein molecule and a water molecule. So the largest in that group will be muscle tissue, because muscle tissue is made up of lots of different cells. The next smallest will be the animal cell. And then below that we would have the cell nucleus, and the next smallest will be a protein molecule, and the second smallest will be a water molecule. Remember, that's made up of just 3 atoms because it's H2O, and the smallest of all will be an atom. So give yourself a big tick if you got that right. If not, just pause and correct what you've written down. Question 2 said name one part you could find in a plant cell but not an animal cell. There's actually I think there's 3 different things you could put for this. You could put a cell wall, you could put chloroplasts, or you could put a vacuole. Either of those 3 would get you a point for that. Question 3, true or false? When a substance melts, its particles move around and become less ordered. That is true. Remember, when a substance is a solid, its particles are lined up in neat rows and they're not really moving at all. If you give something energy and you melt it, you're going to make the particles move around, and they're going to be slightly less ordered and slightly less lined up in neat rows. So question 4, is melting a physical process or a chemical process? Melting is a physical process. There's no chemical reaction taking place. The other thing to remember is physical processes such as melting are reversible. So if you think about an ice cube, you can obviously melt an ice cube, but then you can also freeze it again and you can reverse that process. Chemical reactions or chemical processes are most of the time, but not always, not reversible. Okay, next question said, how do we represent forces on diagrams? We represent forces on diagrams with arrows, and the length of the arrow should represent the size of the force. So a bigger arrow will show a bigger force. Last question here, what's the unit for mass? Hopefully that's an easy question. Unit of mass is the kilogram, or kg. So give yourself ticks there. You've got 6 questions there. Make sure you've corrected and put the right answers down if you got any wrong. And now we'll move on to today. We're going to talk about growth in plants. So we talked about growth in animals previously. Today we're going to talk about growth in plants. So you might want to just pause whilst you put the heading, growth in plants. And we're just going to have a look at the diagram that's on the screen now. So this is a close-up diagram of a root tip. So this is the very, very end of the root of a plant that would be in the ground. And if you look on the right-hand side of that diagram, you can see it's divided into 3 sections. So the lower section on the right, we've got the zone of cell division. We call that the meristem. Above that, we've got what's called the zone of elongation. And then above that, we've got what is called the zone of differentiation. And each of these 3 sections of the root tip have their own job, and you need to be aware of the job of each of these sections. So the first one, let's start back at the bottom there. So the zone of cell division. Well, cell division, we know from previous lessons, is mitosis. So in this section of the root tip, mitosis is taking place and cells are replicating themselves. Plants grow slightly differently to most animals. So animal cells tend to just replicate and animals tend to grow just by increasing the number of cells they've got. Plants do the same thing using mitosis, but just above that section we've got what's called the zone of elongation, and that is where the plant cells actually increase in length. So they elongate, they get bigger. So plants are not only growing by producing more cells using mitosis, but they're actually growing by making their cells longer and larger. And then just like with animals, the cells of the plant will also need to differentiate. So we'll need cells with specialized functions, and at the top of that diagram there you've got the zone of differentiation, and that is where the cells are going to specialize into different types of cell depending on what the plant needs. So on this slide we're looking at two specific types of specialized cell found in plants. The first one there is a root hair cell, nothing to do with hair on your head. It's called a hair cell because it has a very long hair-like structure, which gives it a very large surface area. And the reason it needs a large surface area is because the job of the root hair cell is to absorb water. So this will be under the ground, and it will be trying to draw in as much moisture and water as possible. So the larger the surface area of the cell, the more efficient it's going to be at absorbing water. So it's specialised to do that. And the second cell we've got on that diagram is a xylem cell, which is a hollow tube. So once the water has been drawn in through the root hair cell, the water is distributed through the plant all the way up the plant body to the leaves by xylem cells, which are basically hollow tubes, a bit like tiny little hose pipes, and they transport the water around the plant. So we've got three questions here. This is asking you to describe what happens in the following zones of a plant shoot, which is basically what we just talked about. But this is a possible exam style question really. So what I want you to do is just pause here. If you want to, you can just rewind. You might want to refer back to what we were just talking about, but try not to look at the answer yet. But A, B and C, see if you can write down what is happening in each of those areas of the root tip. So pause here, write down your answer, and we'll go through them in a minute, but try to avoid going forward to the answers. See if you can get them yourself. Okay, so let's go through the answers. So A, what is happening in the zone of division? So the zone of division, we call that the meristem, and that is where mitosis is taking place. So the cells will be quickly dividing to produce more cells by mitosis. B, the zone of elongation, that is where the cells that have been created by mitosis are now getting larger. So the actual cells are elongating and the plant is growing by increasing the size of its cells. And C, the last one, the zone of differentiation, that is where cells are changing, differentiating and becoming specialized cells for different functions. Okay, I'm just going to get you to pause the video in a moment again. I just want you to, in your book, see if you can just copy down the table that's on the screen now. You're going to need quite a lot of space, so you might want to turn your book on its side, try and recreate that table, and we're going to talk through some different plant cells, and I'm going to get you to try and fill in that table as we go along. So just pause here and recreate that table ready, and then press play when you've done that. Okay, so now you've got your table, let's talk about leaf palisade cells. And then as we're talking through this, you can try and write down the important information in your tables. The things you're looking for, we want to know the location on the plant, the function of the cell, and how it's adapted to carry out that function. So all of that information I'm going to tell you, you just need to write it down as we're talking through it. So let's have a look at a leaf palisade cell. So just below the surface of the leaf, you'll find thousands and thousands of leaf palisade cells, and they are jam-packed full of chloroplasts. And if you think about what chloroplasts do, chloroplasts are where photosynthesis takes place. So photosynthesis needs sunlight, and for that reason the palisade cells need to be near the surface of the leaf so they can absorb the sunlight. So if you look back at your table, you should be able to write in the leaf palisade cell row the location on the plant. You should be able to write down the function of a leaf palisade cell, and you should also be able to write down the adaptation. Think about what's inside the palisade cell. What do they have lots of in the palisade cell? Pause whilst you do that, and then we'll talk about plant storage cells. Okay, so let's have a look at plant storage cells. Plant storage cells are adapted to have a large vacuole, and the vacuole stores starch. The plant can then use the starch if it needs to release energy. And these cells are found all throughout the plant. So their function is to store starch, and their adaptation is a large vacuole. So see if you can add that information to your table. Just pause for a second whilst you do that, and then we'll talk about epidermal cells. Okay, so epidermal cells, if you think about the word epidermal, you might have heard this word before. You might know the word epidermis, which is relating to your skin. The reason that these cells are called epidermal cells is because they form a continuous covering, a bit like skin, on the leaf surface, and they protect the inside of the leaf. So they're found all across the surface of the leaves, and they're adapted to form a continuous covering. I'll give you a few minutes just to pause there and add that information to your table as well, and then we'll look at the last type of cell. Okay, so our last cell we need to add to our table are guard cells. So guard cells open and close the stomata on the leaf surface. So stomata are tiny little holes on the underside of leaves where the gases are exchanged. So oxygen is released by the plant and carbon dioxide is taken in. So the guard cells are able to change shape, and by doing this they can open or close the stomata to allow gases to either be able to enter and leave the plant, or to close the stomata and not allow gases to exchange in and out of the plant. So their adaptation is that they can change shape. Their function is to control whether the stomata is open or closed, and the location of the guard cell is that they're on the underside of the leaf, on either side of the stomata. So get that information added to your table, pause whilst you do that, and then press play when you're ready to move on. Okay, so we're going to have a quick look at how we measure plant growth. So if you think about how we would measure growth in a human being, think about two different ways that you could measure growth in a child or a human. One of the things you might do is you might measure somebody's height, and you could use the change in height to work out how much they're growing by. You could also take someone's mass, so you could take their weight, if you like, and you could track their weight over time, and you could see whether they were growing that way. And with plants, it's almost the same. So you could certainly calculate the change in mass of a plant and find out if it was growing. You could also calculate the change in height of a plant to see whether it was growing. In addition to this, you could also calculate the leaf surface area. And that's quite a tricky thing to do, because even measuring the surface area of one leaf is quite tricky because they're not rectangular or square, they're leaf shaped. And then if you imagine trying to calculate the entire surface area of all the leaves on one plant is quite a difficult thing to do. Now, whether you're measuring the change in mass, height, or leaf surface area, there is a little formula that you can use that will help you work out the percentage increase in growth of a plant. And that formula is on the screen now. It's final value minus the starting value divided by the starting value, and then the whole thing times by 100. So in your book, just write down measuring plant growth. Write down the three things that you could use to measure plant growth. That would be the mass of the plant, the height of the plant, or the leaf surface area. And then write down that little formula. Just pause whilst you do that, and then we'll go through a question and we'll see whether you can work it out. Okay, so we're going to try and work out this question. You might want to grab yourself a calculator or have your phone handy with a calculator. There are two plants on the screen there. So we have a small willow tree, and it tells you on the screen that its mass at the start was 2.27 kilograms. And then 5 years later, it's been watered regularly and looked after. 5 years later, its mass has grown to 76.74 kilograms. And we want to know the percentage increase in growth. So we're going to use our formula. So in your book, if you want to pause now and try and use those figures, 2.27 kilograms was the starting mass, 76.74 kilograms was the final mass. If you want to use those two and try and work out the answer for yourself, pause here, make that calculation, and then we'll go through the answer together in a minute. Okay, so you should have got your final value in your equation should be 76.74 minus your start value, which was 2.27 kilograms. That should give you 74.47 kilograms. And then you divide that by your starting value, which was 2.27. And that should give you 32.81. When you times that by 100, you will get 3,280%. That is the percentage growth of that plant over a 5-year period. So if you got that right, well done. If you didn't, see if you can actually lay it out in your book to show how you get to the answer 3,280%. Okay, we've done really well today. We've covered a lot of stuff there. The only thing left for you to do is to click on the link that's in Go for Schools and go to the exit quiz and complete the questions in the quiz. All of the questions in the quiz are based on this video. So you should be able to, if you've done your work throughout this video, you should be able to go through the quiz questions and it shouldn't be too difficult for you to do. You don't need to send me the work that you've done. As long as you've submitted your quiz, I'll automatically receive that quiz and I will know that you've done your work and I will get to see the answers that you've put. So well done for your work today. Any problems at all, please let me know and I will speak to you tomorrow.